Let's speak now to Dennis Rivers, a researcher at the Institute of Security Studies, ISS. He joins us virtually from Pretoria in South Africa. Dennis is, of course, originally from Ukraine. Good morning to you, Dennis. Thank you for your time. Welcome.
Welcome. Good morning. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Let's begin. There seem to be two major shifts that we're reporting this morning. The first is that NATO seems to be implying that it is going to accept that for this war to end, there will need to be concessions of both sides, including of territory. That's the first one. The second is that Finland says it will not join NATO without Sweden. So let's take the first one. The concession of territory. This was what this war was about all along. Ukraine said it would not give up an inch of its territory to Russia. But NATO, which has been one of the main backers for Ukraine, now seems to be shifting its position. Could this have any effect on the ground and on the Ukrainians?
It's a good question. I mean, we need to look at sort of the broader picture. When we discuss the land, what land are we discussing? Are we discussing the new territories that were captured by Russia starting from the February 24th in the south? Or are we discussing, for instance, Crimea that has been annexed in 2014? Or are we discussing, Donetsk and Lugansk? So there's obviously various degrees to that. I think it's a very complicated question for a number of reasons. Of course, NATO. I think the NATO position is there to ease the pressure from Zelensky in case there is this pressure to send a message that it's up to Ukraine to make a decision. However, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is in a bit of a more difficult situation. Any sort of concession will be not seen in a good light by the Ukrainian people, obviously, especially when it comes to the territories that were captured recently by Russia. It is a very difficult question also in terms of military capacity that Ukraine has to take the territories back. We see that right now, despite the heavy fighting in the east and some counteroffensives in the south, we see that Ukraine currently doesn't have the capacity to really take the territory back by force, especially when it comes to Crimea. So it will very much depend on the situation in the east, particularly in the east, where Russia is now amassing troops to start another offensive against the city of Sloviansk, and that should happen over the next week or so. If Russia is successful, we may see a stronger negotiation position for Russia, which may force Ukraine to make concessions. However, if the West rallies more against Ukraine and sends more supplies, we may see a counteroffensive later in the year. We may see a different situation. There's no set rules as of yet. It's difficult to say, but it's definitely a very complicated question.
This gives more ammunition to those who said that the Western allies, speaking of NATO and the EU in particular, were using Ukraine as a staging board, that they wanted Ukraine to be where Russia wore itself out, and that they weren't really believers in the fight for Ukrainian sovereignty, which is why they haven't put troops on the ground. They're not enforcing a low-fly zone. And now they are talking after 4 or 5 months, after 3 or 4 months, they're talking now about Ukraine possibly giving up some kind of territory. In this case, it is NATO saying that. And now you've just talked about the fact that Ukraine doesn't really have the capacity. It doesn't have the capacity because in spite of repeated requests, the West has refused to give it the necessary weapons to go on the offensive.
I think we also need to be, I guess, careful about the way we say, frame the West in this regard. I mean, we have countries like the UK and the US, which were quite proactive in terms of supplying weapons and necessary training, equipment. And then we have countries like Germany that were a bit more cautious, especially in terms of supplying European-made or German-made weapons, modern weapons to Ukraine. So in this regard, The same goes for instance, political backing. So countries, European countries and NATO countries, including Poland, Czech Republic, the Baltic states, were quite active from the start, from the get-go, and were supporting Ukraine politically and diplomatically, whereas it seems that countries in the West initially, in Western Europe initially, were doubtful of Ukraine's ability to fight back against Russia. And when they've realized that Ukraine or the Kyiv will not be captured in the next couple of days, as was predicted, they realized that perhaps they need to up their support. However, it seems from the messages we're getting from Germany, for instance, there's a bit of a concern in terms of overextending the support for Ukraine. There is this concern about humiliating Putin and pushing Putin to take more extreme steps. It seems that Germany, in particular, are quite aware about the risks associated with sort of pushing Putin into a corner and forcing him to look for more drastic solutions to get out of this conflict. So, as we know, Scholz and Macron, the presidents of Germany and President of France, respectively, are set to visit Ukraine over the next 2 weeks, and I think a lot will be clarified when they do visit. It seems that they are coming to suggest some sort of a conditions to Ukraine, some sort of a solution that they will propose to Ukraine, and that will very much dictate the remainder of this conflict, what will happen.
Well, let's talk about the other big shift that I mentioned at the start of our conversation, which is the fact that Finland has now said that if Sweden gets into any kind of trouble or some hurdles on the way to getting into NATO, then it will not join NATO. So it's either both of us join or none of us join. Is this a strategic move on their part? And especially against the fact that NATO now seems to accept the fact that Turkey's opposition to their membership is legitimate, is not simply a bargaining tool.
I still believe that as a NATO, because Turkey is a NATO member as opposed to Sweden and Finland, NATO's position on this issue has to be diplomatic, and it has to reflect the fact that Turkey is a member state. However, I still believe that this is a bargaining chip. It is an attempt to get the most out of this situation, whereas as we know, Turkey, in a private conversation with the president of Finland, Turkey has confirmed, Erdogan has confirmed his willingness to accept both Sweden and Finland as members. And the moment they applied for the membership, Turkey came out against it, citing the conditions. So I still believe it is a bargaining chip. It would not make sense for Turkey to lose this opportunity to get their national interests, to achieve their national interests. With regard to the Sweden and Finland either being members together or not, it's actually a common position they had even before they applied for NATO membership. Even before they applied, the condition was that Sweden will apply if Finland applies, and they're both joined together. They have a very close relationship, historic relationship. However, it is important to know that both countries have received assurances when they applied that the Article 5, one of the most important articles of the NATO treaty, will apply to them in the sense that the countries pledge to defend them. So for all intents and purposes, we can say that at this moment, the most important treaty applies to the two countries already, and they are covered by this umbrella. And countries, Western countries and NATO countries will come to their support in case they are attacked. So if the process takes longer than expected, if it is a prolonged process, regardless, we can say that for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really change the realities on the ground. And I still believe that both countries will join NATO in due course.
At the start of our conversation, I did reference the fact that you are originally from Ukraine. And I do presume that you are still in touch with relatives and friends. So I'm going to end the interview on a personal note. Are you in touch with home? And what's it like when you speak to those that you still have back there?
I am in touch, and I must say it is a very difficult reality on the ground, and it's still very difficult to comprehend. I've heard a lot of personal stories from the people I'm talking to, from people who had to make their way through the forests to escape Russian attack and the invasion and the start of the war because of the shelling, people sleeping in the basements. There are people who still live in the currently occupied territories in Ukraine and the east. And without going to details, I can say that they told me about some of the crimes being committed. In the first day of the invasion in the east, an elderly couple was shot in front of the house, and they were left there dead for the whole day because nobody could come out and basically help them. People were afraid. So there's a lot. It's a very difficult. It's a very difficult situation. At the same time, I'm very interested to see how this war, for the lack of a better word, this war brought people together. I'm seeing people rallying behind each other, people supporting each other. I'm seeing the civil society, the rise of civil society in Ukraine, which is inspiring and gives hope really for the brighter future after the war. So it is a very difficult situation.
I do fully appreciate and understand that, and one can only hope that Godspeed and good luck continues to attend your relatives back in Ukraine. Dennis River, thank you so much for your time and perspective this morning.